Marinette hugged her pillow to her chest, and the tears that she had been holding back for so long finally came pouring out. She looked around her trashed room until her eyes fell on the ripped picture in her hands. A sob escaped her mouth as she traced the torn, jagged edge of the photo. Marinette stared at the ruined photograph, loving and hating it, as tears splattered on the image. The photo's motionless green eyes stared at her, green eyes that she had always adored, but now they pierced her heart like a spear. Marinette tossed the two halves of the ripped photo onto the floor, where they joined the rest of the destroyed pictures. She turned on her side, bawling and choking on her own tears, thinking about the event that occurred earlier that day. Love poems for him, Alia mumbled under her breath as she typed it into the search bar in her phone. And search. Ooh, look at this one. Alia showed Marinette one of the images that showed up. Marinette shook her head. Alia, this is so stupid, grumbled Marinette, but Alia wasn't listening. Come on, what about this one? A million stars up in the sky, one shines brighter, I can't deny. A love so precious, a love so true, a love... Okay, stop, Marinette squeaked, her face bright red as Alia burst out laughing. I can't write that, forget it. I can't think of anything to write, and I am not writing some cheesy love poem we found on the internet. Sometimes cheesy's good, and tomorrow is Valentine's Day, the best day to be cheesy. No, Alia. Fine, said Alia, and she put away her phone. Then what are you going to write? Marinette sighed. I don't know if I'll write him anything. Adrien is probably going to get tons of cheesy love letters from all of his fans, and mine will probably just end up in a huge pile of them. Then don't write anything and just tell him how you feel. Come on, Alia, you know how that would go. I can barely say hi to him, much less I love you. Well, Alia grunted, I've tried everything I can to help you. She checked the time on her phone. I've got to go. See you tomorrow at school. Alia got up and turned to leave when Marinette stopped her. I'm sorry. I know you're trying to help. I don't know. Marinette apologized and glanced at Alia. Alia smiled and hugged her friends. Girl, you don't need to apologize. I guess when it's the right time, you'll be ready. Marinette thanked her and hugged her back. After Alia left, Marinette tried to write something that felt right, but nothing did. She wrote and wrote, but everything seemed too creepy, too mushy, or too personal. After all, they were only teenagers, and Marinette was pretty sure marry me and we will have many hamsters was not going to help her situation. After an hour of trying to find the right words, Marinette groaned and threw the note in the trash can. She sighed and grabbed her coat, thinking that some fresh air might help her clear her head. She walked outside, heading towards the park. The chilly February wind blew her hair around. She pulled her jacket tighter around her and walked into the park. She was walking around, taking deep breaths, looking up at the beautiful evening sky, when her eyes fell on someone sitting on a bench. Her eyes widened, and she hid behind a tree. He was here. Adrien. She glanced at him, and she felt her heart speed up, and the chilly air suddenly felt warm and stuffy. He was sitting only a few feet away from her, and he was wearing a light blue beanie that matched his scarf. Marinette blushed as she realized the scarf he was wearing was the one she gave him for his birthday. She smiled. She was glad he was wearing it, even though he didn't know it was her who had given it to him. He was hunched over, focusing intently on something he was writing. He stopped writing for a second and read over the paper. He smiled and blushed. Marinette tucked behind the tree again. She decided Alia was right. She needed to tell him how she felt. This was the right time. She felt all her nervous energy turn into confidence as she told herself it was time and she was ready. She didn't just need to tell him. She wanted to. She loved him so much it hurt. She wanted him, she needed him, and if she didn't tell him, nothing would happen, and that's what she would become. Nothing. Marinette took a deep breath. She could do this. Marinette took a step out from her hiding place, but then immediately stepped back. Someone was approaching Adrien. She squinted her eyes. It was... Kagami? What was she doing here? Marinette watched as Kagami sat next to Adrien, and they started talking. Marinette let out a frustrated sigh. What were they talking about? She would need to get closer. Marinette was so busy trying to figure out how to get close to them without being seen that she didn't notice the paper Adrien had been writing on slip off the bench and land on the ground. Marinette finally decided she would have to crouch and crawl behind the bench and hope that they didn't see her. She got down on her hands and knees and started crawling slowly through the bushes towards the bench. Now that she was behind them, she could hear their conversation. Sadly, she had taken too long to get over there, and their conversation was over. "Come on," Marinette heard Adrien say. "We have reservations and don't want to be late." She heard them stand up. "Of course," Kagami giggled, and Adrien heard their footsteps start to fade away. "No," Marinette thought, "he can't leave. I must tell him, even if it's in front of Kagami. I need him to know." Marinette was about to get up and rush after them when her hand brushed against something. Marinette looked down and saw it was a piece of paper. She realized it was the one Adrien had been writing on, the one he seemed so happy, so satisfied about. In his handwriting, it said, "Valentine's surprise for her. Red roses with baby's breath? Check. Fairy lights? Check. Candles? Check. Picnic blanket on the rooftop? Check. Chocolate dessert? Check. Heart confetti? Check. View of the Eiffel Tower? Check." In the bottom right-hand corner of the paper, there was a side note. Is too much? Too romantic? Maybe she won't like it. Too romantic? Marinette thought as she read Adrien's side note. She laughed, but her eyes stung. It was way over the top romantic, but that's what made it so perfect. If a guy did this for a girl, they would love it. Marinette would have loved it, at least. An image of Kagami and Adrien formed in Marinette's mind. They were sitting on a picnic blanket, feeding each other chocolate dessert. They were laughing and smiling. The image shattered and tears threatened to fall from Marinette's eyes. Marinette took a shaky breath. She was not going to cry. She crumpled up the note and stood up, walking to the nearest trash can, and she threw it away. She couldn't tell Adrien how she felt, not when he was clearly in love with someone else. Those plans must be for Kagami, that's why she showed up. He's taking her to his perfect date. A tear fell down Marinette's face, but she quickly wiped it away. She was happy. Yes, she was happy for him. She wants Adrien to be happy, even if that happiness was with Kagami and not her, right? She kept telling herself that she was happy, but her mind flashed to the title of the piece of paper she found, Valentine's surprise for her. Marinette realized she would never be her. She would never be his, and he would never be hers. She couldn't be happy. Not now. Maybe one day, but not today. Today it was too much. It hurt too bad. She started to walk home, but eventually picked up her pace and ran, all the way back home and up to her room, where she finally let it all out. Marinette entered her room, and she saw him everywhere. Pictures, posters. No matter where she looked, his green eyes stared back at her. She went crazy. She just needed him gone. She grabbed every photo, tearing them off the wall. She wanted to scream, but she didn't want to disturb her parents. She didn't need to worry them with her stupid boy problems. So instead, she wept bitterly as she tore each photo in half, one by one. Now, here she was, laying in ripped up pieces of what she loved and hated the most. Marinette sat up and sniffed. She looked out her window and saw it was dark. How long had she been crying? She got up and grabbed her phone. The time read 10 p.m. She sighed and stood up. She had patrol tonight, and while she just wanted to stay in bed and cry herself to sleep, the superhero part of her told her to keep moving forward. "Tiki?" Marinette called out quietly, wiping the last of her tears away. She needed to pull herself together. Tiki flew over to Marinette cautiously, landing on her hand. Tiki looked like she wanted to say something, but decided not to. Instead, she just patted Marinette and gave her a synthetic smile. Marinette smiled sadly. "Let's get this patrol over with, Marinette murmured, and Tiki nodded. Marinette took a deep breath. She kind of hoped an Akuma would show up to take her mind off of things. She immediately felt bad for thinking that. Akumas hurt people, and she wasn't going to wish harm on innocent people so she could feel better. "Tiki, spots on," Marinette commanded, and she transformed. She climbed out her window and sighed. "It's just patrol. I can do this," she thought. She walked to the edge of her balcony and climbed on the railing. Ladybug threw her yo-yo and leaped. Adrien walked into his room, closed the door, and breathed a sigh of relief. It felt as if the dinner with his father and Kagami's mother, Mrs. Teruji, lasted forever. He honestly still didn't understand why they were meeting. When he asked about it, his dad said it was for work and that he had to come, no questions asked. He didn't really want to be alone at the dinner with his father and Mrs. Teruji, so he asked Kagami the other day at fencing to come with him. She agreed, and they both decided they would meet in the park so they could arrive together. Even with Kagami there, the dinner had been a bore. All they did was talk about fencing and how they wished their parents weren't as strict. All in all, he was very glad that the dinner was now over. He was taking off his hat and scarf when Plagg flew out of his pocket. Ahem. Oh, lover boy, don't you have somewhere to be? Plagg snickered. At first, Adrien was confused. What was Plagg teasing him about this time? When Plagg saw Adrien give him a questioning look, he rolled his eyes and pointed to a bouquet of red roses and baby breath flowers that lay on Adrien's bed. Adrien's eyes widened as they fell on the bouquet, realizing what Plagg was talking about. How could he have forgotten? Plagg, claws out! Adrien yelped. Adrien transformed, grabbed the roses, a blanket, and 2 small boxes out of his mini fridge. He opened his windows, extended his baton, and jumped. Cat Noir moved slowly, trying hard not to crush the flowers or drop the boxes he held. Finally, he reached his destination, an abandoned rooftop, which didn't seem all that special, since there were multiple of those in Paris, but Cat Noir had been there earlier in the day and had transformed it into a lovely venue. Little twinkling fairy lights were strung on the railing, and Cat Noir had swept and polished everything. He now needed to set up everything else that he had brought over. He spread out the blanket, which was a challenge since it was very windy. Once he tamed the blanket, he sprinkled little heart confetti across the floor, though most of it blew away, but Cat Noir wouldn't let the wind dampen his spirits. Then, he placed a couple of candles in the middle of the blanket, along with the bouquet of roses in the small boxes, which held chocolate cake inside. Cat Noir stood up and examined the setting. He blushed. This was way over the top, but it was too late now. Go big or go home, right? Cat Noir thought. He took a deep but shaky breath. Though he would never admit it, he was nervous. The girl he was trying to impress had rejected him before. What's stopping her from doing it again? He shook his head. No negative thoughts. Come on, I'm Cat Noir. I got this, Cat Noir muttered under his breath. He turned around and leapt from the rooftop, using his baton to help him hover in the air. He had the date. Now he just needed the girl that would make this night perfect. Ladybug. Cat Noir sighed. He looked all over Paris and still could not find her. He checked the time, 10:40. Ladybug should be on patrol right now. Where was she? He was about to give up and just go home when a flash of red caught his eye. There she was, on the Eiffel Tower. Cat Noir extended his baton to push him off the roof. He jumped from building to building, adrenaline in his veins, the wind in his hair, and nervous energy bunched inside of him. Finally, he made it to the Eiffel Tower. He landed quietly. Ladybug's back was towards him. Cat Noir smirked and crept up behind her. He got right next to her ear and whispered, "Nice night, isn't it, Lovebug?" "Ugh!" Ladybug screamed, jumping away. She stumbled and would have fallen off the tower if not for Cat Noir, who quickly swooped in and grabbed her hand, pulling her upright. He started to laugh, but his laughter faded away when he realized how close Ladybug was to him. Now normally, this is when he would make an incredible cat pun, but he noticed that Ladybug's eyes were red. Tears were running down her face. She was crying. Ladybug tried to pull away from him, but he held on to her. "Ladybug, what's wrong?" Cat Noir asked, his brow creasing in worry as she turned her head away from him. Instead of answering his question, she said, "What are you doing here, Cat Noir? It's my night to do patrol. You shouldn't be here." He didn't know how to answer, but thankfully he didn't have to, because just then Ladybug did the unexpected. She hugged him and started to sob. Cat Noir was shocked, but didn't hesitate to hug her back. He gripped her tightly, wanting to comfort her as much as possible. They slowly sank to the ground until they were sitting with Ladybug's head on Cat Noir's shoulder. He put his arm around her as she sniffed. Silent tears flowed down her face. His lady never cried like this before, but he could tell that she was heartbroken. At first, Ladybug was angry at him for showing up, tense when he touched her, as if she hated everything in the world. But then she had hugged him, needing comfort, needed someone to keep her from falling. Literally. Cat Noir knew what all that felt like. He had been heartbroken before too, but he wasn't going to make this about him. Ladybug was hurting, and he intended to do everything he could to make her feel better. Just to break the silence, he said, "You know, if you tell me who did this to you, I could kick him off the Eiffel Tower." Ladybug lifted her head off his shoulder, confused. What? She sniffed. "But I didn't... How do you know what was wrong?" "I could just tell," Cat Noir answered, looking away so she couldn't see his face. She looked down, understanding what he was saying. She caught on quick that he was saying he had been heartbroken before. They sat in silence for a while until Ladybug spoke. "I'm sorry." Cat Noir looked at her puzzled. "Sorry? For what?" For rejecting you so many times. If I'd known how much it hurt, Cat Noir put his hand up, stopping her. "No, stop. Don't apologize for following your heart. We aren't here to talk about me. Please, tell me what happened." Ladybug took a shaky breath. "Well, I saw the guy I liked leave somewhere with a girl. He dropped a piece of paper and I retrieved it. It was in his handwriting. Written down were his plans for this big Valentine surprise. I put two and two together, leaving with a girl and a surprise." Ladybug's voice trailed off as she stared at the city of lights. Cat Noir stayed quiet, staring at the city as well, when he finally brought up the courage to ask, "Is that it?" Ladybug jerked her head to look at him, giving him a dirty look, but Cat Noir put up his hands in surrender. "I'm sorry. I just meant, it sounds like there's more to the story." He put his hands down as Ladybug's angry glare turned soft. She turned back around, getting a wistful look in her eyes. Finally she spoke, barely above a whisper, that Cat Noir had to lean in to hear her. Before the girl showed up, I was planning on telling him how I feel. I was going to tell him that I love him." She glanced skeptically at Cat Noir, who tried to keep his face neutral. But then the girl showed up. I found the paper and..." She was starting to get choked up. If he loves her, then I don't want to ruin anything. I want him to be happy, so I didn't tell him. I let him go." Ladybug's lower lip trembled as she looked at Cat Noir, new tears shining in her eyes. Cat felt his heart squeeze. He hated seeing his lady broken like this. He pushed his feelings away. He didn't matter. She did. Cat Noir squeezed her shoulder as she leaned into him, accepting his embrace and comfort. He held her close and whispered, "I'm glad you told me. It lets me know you trust me. I'm your partner and I care about you. Trust me, you'll get through this." Ladybug looked at him and smiled, grateful that he was here. After a few more moments of silence, Cat Noir said, So listen, I know this isn't the best time to ask, but I actually, had a date planned for us. But I totally understand if you don't want to go, but I had cake, so you can just grab it and go if you..." Ladybug stopped him and chuckled. "Calm down, Cat. I can't understand you. But I did hear the word cake?" She looked at him. Cat Noir cleared his throat and blushed. Yeah, I got us both chocolate cake." "Well, you should have just started with that, silly cat." Ladybug stood up and wiped her eyes. "Come on, show me where you set up this date." Cat blinked. He was stunned, but he quickly came over a shock and laughed. "Whatever you say, m'lady." He stood up and bowed dramatically. "Right this way." Cat Noir started to sweat. His face was completely red as Ladybug landed on the rooftop behind him. She walked around taking in everything until her eyes fell on the flowers. She bent over and picked them up. When Ladybug looked at Cat Noir, there were tears shining in her blue eyes. That's it, Cat Noir thought. She hates it. I did too much. Ugh, I'm such an idiot. Look, sorry. I know it's a lot, so if you just want to take the cake and go, you can, Cat mumbled, his embarrassment growing by the second as Ladybug just stared at him. Cat squirmed and looked away. Well, if you're not going to leave, you might as well say something. You're him, Ladybug stuttered, and Cat Noir froze. What did she mean by that? He slowly turned around to face Ladybug. Her whole body was trembling. The roses, the lights, everything here is exactly what I pictured when I read you were at the park. I can't, but how you're him. You're Adrien. Cat Noir's eyes widened as he heard her say his civilian name. Ladybug tried to breathe and tears slipped from her eyes. She fiercely wiped them away. She was so sick of crying. Cat Noir was speechless. Nobody else had been in the park earlier except him and Kagami, but somehow someone else was there. Ladybug, or at least her civilian form was there, and she had found his Valentine's plans he'd made. The plans Ladybug thought was for another girl, but that meant, I'm the boy you're in love with? Cat Noir asked, astonished. Ladybug looked away and gave a slight nod. All this time, Ladybug said quietly. She chuckled. We've been jealous of ourselves this whole time. You've been jealous of the boy I liked, but then it turned out to be you, and Adrien has always talked about a girl he liked, which turned out to be me. She put her fingers to her temples like she still couldn't wrap her mind around all of it. All of this was just going too fast that Cat Noir could barely think. He knew Ladybug? They were obviously friends if he had been talking about a girl he liked around her. His mind started mentally going through a list of all of his close friends. None of his friends could possibly be Ladybug except... No, it couldn't be her. No one was that lucky. Besides, if he asked and it wasn't her, he would be embarrassed. So instead he asked, "Who are you?" And what Ladybug did next was more surprising than the hug she gave him earlier. "Tiki," Ladybug said, "spots off." There was a bright flash of pink light, and Cat Noir had to shield his eyes. The light died down, and Cat Noir felt his pulse quicken. He could hear his heart pound as he lowered his hands, and there was... Marinette? Hi, Marinette stammered, her face turning pink. Cat Noir's jaw dropped. Marinette took that as a bad sign and looked down. Cat Noir stared at her in utter shock. What Marinette didn't know was that Cat Noir was trying to process that the two people he admired most was the same person. He felt like his brain was malfunctioning. "Look, I get that you're disappointed," Marinette started to say, but never finished. Cat Noir had rushed her and kissed her. For a moment, time stopped, and it was just them. Marinette's lips were wet and salty from crying, but Cat didn't mind. He put his hands around her waist and pulled her closer to him. Marinette didn't push away. She felt the cold wind whip all around her, tugging at her, but she clasped her hands around Cat Noir's neck, keeping herself close to him. It was only one kiss, but it meant everything to them. They had always known each other, but now they knew each other. They found each other. Cat Noir slowly pulled away from the kiss, breathing heavy, but he didn't let go of Marinette. "Claws in," he commanded. Marinette closed her eyes as green light glowed brightly around Cat Noir as he de-transformed. When the light faded, she opened her eyes and was looking at Adrien Agreste. His gorgeous green eyes stared deeply into hers, the same green eyes that just a few hours ago she thought she'd never be able to look at again. "My lady," Adrien said, bringing Marinette out of her daze, and he smiled at her. "How on earth could you ever think that I would be disappointed?" And once again their lips met. Marinette's heart melted, and she swore to herself that she would never let him go again. Adrien and Marinette talked for hours. Their second kiss had been rudely interrupted by Adrien's Kwame Plag, who had told them to get a room. Tiki then proceeded to hit and shush Plag, but it was too late. The scene changed from romantic to awkward very quickly. While blushing, Adrien and Marinette introduced their Kwames to each other. After that, they sat down and talked while eating some of the cake Adrien had brought. At first, it was just awkward small talk, but eventually, Marinette stopped stuttering, and Adrien stopped blushing, and they had some really good conversations. They talked about how they balanced their superhero life with their civilian life, how stupid they were not realizing who they were. They had a good laugh when Adrien brought up how they almost revealed their identities during the making of Laura Nightingale's music video. Now that she didn't have her superhero gear on, Marinette was starting to get chilly. Adrien noticed her shiver and gently grabbed her hand and pulled her closer to him. She tensed, not really used to Adrien being so forward, but then she relaxed, putting her head on his chest. He draped his arm around her. She immediately felt warmer. They both stared at the Eiffel Tower in the distance. The wind howled all around them, but they didn't care. They were keeping each other warm. Finally breaking the silence, Marinette asked, "I know it's none of my business, but I've been wondering, where did you go with Kagami?" "Oh, our parents were having a dinner conference, and my father was making me go. I didn't want to be alone with the most boring adults on the planet all night, so I asked if Kagami would come as well," explained Adrien. "That's why you said you had reservations. That makes sense now," Marinette pondered out loud, but wished she hadn't because Adrien asked, "You heard us? You saw and heard us, but I never saw or heard you. Where were you?" Marinette blushed at a loss for words. "Behind the bench you guys were sitting on?" She looked at Adrien, expecting him to turn away in disgust at her for spying on him, but instead he laughed. She breathed a sigh of relief and began to laugh with him. "I promise I'm not crazy." Adrien looked at her with a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Now, Lovebug, don't make promises that aren't true. You are crazy." He leaned in close to her, whispering in her ear, "But that's why I love you." Marinette felt her heart speed up and she blushed and whispered back, "I love you too." For a while they cuddled each other, enjoying each other's company and warmth embrace. Marinette didn't ever want to leave. For once, everything felt just as it should be. Everything felt right. But she knew it was late, and she knew she needed to head home. "What time is it?" Marinette asked. Adrien pulled out his phone and looked at the time. 2:13 a.m. He said, "Gosh, I didn't realize how late it was. We have school tomorrow, today, actually." Marinette reluctantly stood up. "Spots on," she called out, and transformed into Ladybug. At the same time, Adrien called Claws out and transformed into Cat Noir. Oh, before you go, we probably shouldn't tell Ollie and Nino yet. About us. I mean, us being together, not us as in Ladybug and Cat Noir. Usually normal people don't get together overnight. But we're anything but normal, aren't we? They both laughed, and Cat Noir agreed that they should wait to tell Ollie and Nino. But then he just kept staring at Ladybug with a stupid grin on his face. What? Ladybug demanded. Oh, nothing, Cat Noir mused while he walked closer to her, their noses almost touching. I just like that there's an us now. He smirked and wiggled his eyebrows. Ladybug rolled her eyes. Oh, you silly cat. Then she grabbed him by his collar and kissed him. She loved this feeling of bliss and confidence, and she loved seeing Cat Noir's starstruck face when she pulled away. She turned around, about to grab her yo-yo to head home, when Cat Noir grabbed her wrist and said, "Hey." She turned around and he smiled. Happy Valentine's Day.